we'll start. Welcome to the second session of StoryLab, Game Changers Films in collaboration with the Black Cultural Zone. And this month, let's go to the next slide. This month, we're happy to have a conversation with a filmmaker that a lot of you may know. And if you don't, you'll get to know her work. That's Miss Cheryl Fabio. What's up, Cheryl? How you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. Thank you for your patience. So we're gonna just go through this rundown so that people can see what we're up to today for the 2 hours that we have. We'll start off with a clip from Evolutionary Blues, which is a really powerful documentary about the West Oakland music scene and the history of that scene, and a lot of other things. I haven't seen all of it. I've seen the trailer, but we're gonna have a conversation about how that film came together, and Cheryl will kind of give us a lot of insight about how the interviewing process for that, as well as her other films, and just a lot of other things about what it takes to kind of cover a lot of ground in a film like that. Because there's a lot, I'm sure there's a lot of different layers. We'll talk about the art of the interview, and then we'll give people opportunity to talk about stories or films that they're interested in or ideas they have for stories, and just kind of open it up and have a conversation. We won't be looking at these slides so much as we'll be looking at, each other. And if we don't have if we have, only a handful of folks, then we won't do breakouts. We'll just kind of talk amongst ourselves and figure out the best ways to come away. We want people to come away with this, with some solid ideas. If you have an idea for a film, we're going to help you take it to the next level. So let's go to the next slide. This is a poster, and maybe we'll come back to this because I'm going to have Cheryl talk about her film after a clip. But I mean, when I see this, I think about the West Oakland, Slim Jenkins and 7th Avenue and all the stories that I've heard from West Oakland right after World War II, and probably even before World War II, where it was known as like the Harlem of the West. That's what this poster reminds me of. Let's go to the actual trailer for Evolutionary Blues. Let's play that, and when we come back, we'll have a conversation with Cheryl.
The Great Migration was an outpouring of 6 million African Americans from the South to the rest of the United States of America from the time of World War I until the 1970s. 90% of all African Americans were living in the South at the time the Great Migration began. And that meant that 10% of all African Americans were spread out throughout the entire rest of the United States. And this migration followed 3 beautifully predictable streams.
We focus on the development of West Coast blues, that wartime migration of so many cultures: Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma.
Music is probably the most significant and recognizable, instantly recognizable gift of the Great Migration. I don't know what we would be listening to if there were no Great Migration. I mean, literally, as Americans and thus as human beings, because of the impact that American music has had on what people in the world listen to.
For the kids to know that, really know that, and know it from a prideful place. But no, look what we did. Our contribution is so great.
You bring these Africans over here to work for no pay, and you're going to own them. And they're coming with this rich musical tradition that goes back thousands of years in Africa, and you put them in the fields, something happens.
The more you research Black music, the more you realize everywhere Black folks go, they create a musical scene of their own.
I grew up in the country. I drank well water. I worked in the field. I know what it's like. I kind of know where they're coming from.
The people brought the sounds that was with them. And once they became city people, the sounds evolved because they was evolving. So the music starts reflecting that.
I always call it Black roots because it came really from the spirituals and singing in the fields, and that's all that you had.
All American music, especially country music, is Black blues and slave music.
From darkness, from tragedy, from tragic surroundings and environments, as we even learned from hip hop, comes great art.
What the migration did was it allowed people who had been held down to, in some cases within a single generation, lift themselves up to such a degree that they would actually have an indelible impact on the culture itself.
Wow, Evolutionary Blues. Can't wait to see it. Let's go out of this and let's just, I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute and we can just have a conversation. So what I wanna do is, since we are recording and there's other people who might wanna, who missed this, but I wanna properly introduce you, Cheryl. Cheryl Fabio was raised in East Oakland, where she now resides. She attended Fisk University for a BA in sociology and Stanford University's documentary film program for her graduate degree. More recently, Fabio earned a JD from JF Kennedy. She has worked extensively in the nonprofit complex as a teacher in elementary schools and has managed PEG cable channels. Fabio is the executive director of the Sarah Webster Fabio Center for Social Justice, a 501c3 that uses film and other arts to create and celebrate social change. Fabio is the mother of 2 and the grandmother of 4. That's welcome, Cheryl. It seems like it's a very slim bio. It seems like you've done so many more things that I know of that are not in that bio, but and hopefully you can share some of that with our audience. So welcome.
Thank you. First I have to say that when I first met you, we were in an environment with a lot of community folks, and you were talking about film and said something about, and you grandmas can tell us stories, and I said, well, some of us grandmas make films, and I'm saying that because before me, people also ask me with like that bio, do you really mean to emphasize all that schooling, right? Because, did that schooling put you where you are, or did your passion and your self-drive? And I think it's the self-drive, but in my day, before me, film was an apprenticeship kind of. You entered because you knew somebody, and it was a very small network of old white men by the time my generation came up. So going to school was the way that you got your hands on those very expensive cameras, the film, the training. So if you aren't part of that network, then you had to go through something that made provisions for that. It's a really different world today. And so as I listen to the bio, almost everything that's in it dates me. But it is that dating, I think, that I offer, because I appreciate kind of the generational understanding of who we've been and who we are and who we're becoming. So from where I sit, I love meeting, I've been chatting, I love meeting new people who are having a completely different experience with this stuff. Many are going to school, and some are just starting with their iPhones and swirling until they get the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So anyway.
Right, no, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because we're gonna have an ongoing conversation, obviously, but just to give other people an idea of kind of the roots or your origins into filmmaking. Do you remember, or can you share a story about kind of the first time you thought you could become a filmmaker?
Yeah, well, the first thought wasn't about film, it was actually photography. So at Fisk, Bobby Sinstack, whose family owns the Chicago Defender, came to Nashville to Fisk to start a communications program. So we didn't have anything like that. And some of us had cameras and we'd run around. So the first, I often say, I come from a really talented family, right? They all had talents. They knew what it was. It was all visible and all that. And I couldn't figure out where I fit. So I took this class with Bobby Sinstack, and other kids were taking it as well. And I took this photograph that actually, it is a beautiful photograph. They blew it up like maybe it was 16 feet tall and put it on the outside of a building. And that was such a powerful experience for me. First of all, because, we were using 35mm cameras. So the negative I shot was about this big. And so to see that negative up on this building, it was powerful. And in those, I would say we did street photography. So we were just kind of going around capturing Black life. Very powerful thing. And then Fisk sent me to Africa when I graduated at the end of my tenure there. And you talk about power. So and they sent me with film, and they developed the film when I came back. So for a kid who, I was there by the seat of my pants, but all of that, it just really focused me on, well, this is what you've got the ability to kind of see and interpret things, and your way of doing that is going to be different from everyone else. If 5 of us are standing in a row, our cameras are going to be focused slightly differently. And, so that was my moment. When I did come home, though, I went to Stanford's, and this is probably the moment that drove me in the way that I do make films. The first assignment, the first day I went to Stanford, they showed D.W. Griffin's film, Birth of a Nation. I didn't know anything about Birth of a Nation. And I was married to a Black guy from Panama who was new to the country. And we watched that film together, and he said, Cheryl, people didn't really act like that. I was livid. And Stanford acted like there was nothing about that film that was wrong. And I kept raising, and they kind of would, so this was in the early 70s, and everyone knew better by then. So that kind of focused me on what my journey would be in film. That was, excuse me for saying a bad word, that was bullshit. And that was not going to be my self-image. It was not going to be how I spent my time making images of, the world that I lived in. And just another, I almost tremble today. I mean, I had such a hard time driving past Stanford after that. I was determined to go through their program, but it was really a traumatic experience because everything they did was like that, which was the complete opposite. I was coming from a Black school where everything they did there was to, bolster you. And Stanford's experience was just the opposite. So
Yeah, I've heard a lot of horror stories about people who just kind of they made it through Stanford, and there's just that double lens, right? Where they like that they've made it through there, but then they've had to go through that gauntlet of racism. But I wanted to ask you also, and then I'm going to briefly open it up, but then I want to keep moving because we're kind of behind. I wanted to ask you, because you've been able to adapt clearly to every generation that's come since you've started in terms of storytelling, visual storytelling, and all types of storytelling in terms of tech, what's out there now. The analogy I like to use is that even 15 years ago, and still right now, like if you're talking about Hollywood, but even 15 years ago, filmmaking was really about almost saying, it was almost like cricket or polo or swimming, the way those kinds of endeavors lock Black people out, because you have had access to these resources. You couldn't go and learn cricket. You weren't going to play tennis, like that, and so filmmaking was like, you could have all the ideas you want as a producer or a writer, but then if you don't have the cameras and the equipment and know how to do film and those kind of things, what have you thought about how now with social media and technology and just digital film, how everybody, it's kind of been democratized in a way? Do you think it's easier for people to get into it now, or and be serious about it, or what's your historical perspective?
Well, first of all, let me say two things. Number one, I'm a Black woman. And number two, a Black woman in the Bay Area. And, when I was coming through, there was a very rich industrial market in the Bay Area. But, in my 50 or more years of making film, I don't think I've ever gotten film money to make a film. I don't think I've ever been invited into a community that I am well entrenched in. My experience has been, one of the reasons that I manage those PEG channels is because then I would have access to stuff, and I would be able to not only access the technology, but also have a method of putting that, whatever the message was, out. So that's one of the ways that I kept kind of adapting to the changes in technology, as I would try and put myself in places where I could access it. When it comes to today, I think that there are, I've been paying attention to Issa Rae, for instance, because she's somebody who has the appearance of being able to take advantage of this new technology. But if you look closely, Issa Rae went to Stanford, right?
Yeah.
And there's a machine behind her. So you can take an iPhone and you can make a film, and you can download Adobe Premiere. And then what are you going to do with it? Yes, you can put it on YouTube and you can pay for it, but there's still, I think the biggest challenge today is distribution. And so there are a lot more, there's all the streaming and all. There's still a challenge, and you still need a team behind you. So the biggest thing is the person who can do this craft daily is the person whose chops are going to rise above the fray. So there's a benefit to the new technology. And yet there's still challenges like, where do I put it? And how do I get it there? And how do I get an audience to view it? Because the audience has 10 million places to put their eyes as well. Mm-hmm. So it's still a very complicated thing. It's changing, but it's complex, and we don't need to think of it as being easy. And more importantly, we need to understand that our audiences are very sophisticated. And so when you come out with something that is technically less, they don't buy that stuff. The film that you showed the trailer to, it doesn't show in Zoom because Zoom doesn't accept these very complex audio beds. Mm-hmm. So the music is falling in and out in that trailer through Zoom. But what I really want to say is that the film is really, it's polished. The finish is polished. It's properly mixed, it's colorized, all of those things. And so again, I was saying before we started that seeing it the other night, seeing the DCP, you say, wow, it's beautiful, because it is beautiful. The colors are rich and all of that, right? So wait, I just lost I get so excited.
No, thank you for that, because you brought up some other things that I think we can get into later, because, there's so many different kind of trains running, 2 trains, 3 trains running. So it's storytelling, which we'll talk about, right, is one thing. But then the technical aspect of filmmaking and the visual storytelling and having the cinematography be right and have the sound mix right. There's so many different levels, so many different pieces of that puzzle, which can be a whole different, we're going to have a session on that as well. But I wanted to jump ahead and show the clip from your other film East Oakland Counter Narrative. East
Okay.
Oakland Counter Narratives, and then I think we can open it up for a discussion. So let me set that up. Okay, so Carrington can take us to that slide. And this is East Oakland Counter Narratives.
Oakland is the soul of the Bay Area.
And there's no place like home.
I remember my parents always trying to go and buy a house. And it took so long to find a house.
I'm a native of East Oakland, born and raised, have actually lived all over East Oakland. My family moved around a lot, but that just means I got to experience different neighborhoods.
Our 8th grade field trip was like to Great America. And I was like, I haven't been to Great America before. Like, I want to go to the snow.
My grandmother used to send me around the corner to Paul's store. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. I didn't worry about anybody harming me.
And on my dad's side, they just came from Alexandria, Louisiana, to just have a better quality of life.
My name is John Jones III. I'm a 3rd generation East Oakland resident. In fact, there's a picture of my grandfather who I'm named after. He's the first in my family to move to Oakland. He served in World War II.
It's a middle class neighborhood, but really drug-ridden environment. And our particular block was a neighborhood in an old sense.
People really thought that East Oakland was far away.
School itself is about giving you opportunities, but whether you take advantage of those opportunities is something that I felt that I really learned from home.
The Black families that came in the 50s integrated, so there became a tight-knit community. And seeing it from a kid's level, it was fun. Now that I know what my parents were going through, they became tight-knit to survive.
East Oakland used to be a neighborhood where we knew our neighbors. Now it's just a hub because we don't know who lives next door to us anymore.
I think still hope, because that is what's driven us.
I hope we're able to tell our story articulately, grounded, where we get our due back.
All right. Wow. That's really interesting because we talked about this, Cheryl. Let me stop that.
It's got a life of its own.
Yeah, it wants to keep playing and keep playing. Yeah. And we talked about that because, having just directed the short East Oakland Rising, about the 10 years of gentrification and displacement and all the other issues that have impacted East Oakland, but also about the Black cultural zone rising and changing the whole game in East Oakland, pushing forward to change the future. We talked about interviewing and how my interviews look different than yours, and we're telling a similar story, but let's open it up because I have a couple of people who've texted me that are going to be joining, but right now we have at least, and I want, so Carrington York is our new media intern with Game Changers Films, and we welcome. Today is her first week, not her first day, but it's her first week. So she's going to be on the team and helping us with everything from, if she could be here and be a production assistant, she's in DC. She's a graduating senior at Howard University. But I'll welcome Carrington.
Hello, everyone. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm the one behind the controls trying to make sure I don't keep playing the trailers, but it's so great to be here.
And Sammy, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here with you.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
So I just wanted to open it up because, this is about community building and audience engagement, and just whoever we have is what we're rolling with. So if there's questions that you have, for Cheryl so far.
Before I do questions, I was actually about to make a point, and watching that trailer, it reminded me of the point I was trying to make, which is the first film clip that you showed has the guy who mixed it is the one who did Crip Camp, and it's gotten all the, he did a beautiful job of mixing it, and the colorized.
Jim Lebrecht did that?
Jim Lebrecht did it,
Okay.
right.
Well.
But the second one that you just showed, and you can't really tell through Zoom, but I think you can tell. I started making it, COVID happened, and like everything kind of shut down, but I had a deadline, so I had to keep on making this film, and it got to the end, and I wasn't able to raise more money and do all that stuff, so I had to try and mix it. I'm not an audio mixer, so that film, even though it's finished, it really still has at least another stage to go through in order for me to push it unconditionally. Right now I kind of have to give an explanation, and some people might not know what it is that they're reacting to, but they know. They would, if you saw the two films together, you would know there's a difference in that product. And it's all of that finishing stuff. That finishing stuff is about a third of the budget of the film.
Yeah. Post-production is everything. Production, obviously you got to do it right, but so many things that you can fix or mess up in post. And other people who have done it they're going to notice all those little things. So as filmmakers, sometimes we cringe when we have to release a film and we know the sound, especially the sound, you got to have great audio. But does anybody have questions? Because I want to talk about, evolutionary blues a little bit. Anybody have any questions about that? If not, I can throw some questions out, but I'll open it up.
Thank you for sharing, these beautiful stories, pieces, and a lens into your approach and your journey. I feel really moved by so many pieces of these trailers, and just clicked the borrow so that I can watch and absorb in my own time. I think for me, what's striking about the last trailer is your closeness to Oakland's community. And I'm curious, when you're approaching the folks and selecting the folks that you'd like to share stories, how much there's this tension between a meta narrative and a story you'd like to hold and tell, versus sort of the organic, just thread of allowing what people want to say and need to say. And then, that process of the preparation of interviewing and doing that art of interviewing, and then how folks respond to seeing that in the product when they're in it or when they're related to that person's story.
That's a really good question. Thanks for that. Because I think that's the whole piece with my film practice. I don't know how common it is, but so I will glob onto an idea. So there's some idea that won't let me shake it loose, because I know that when I commit to that idea, I'm about to spend a couple of years of my shorter and shorter and shorter remaining life. So it has to glob onto me. So that's step one. Okay. And then step two is, well, how do I tell that story? And, my house will have scratch paper all over it of this idea and that idea and notebooks. And I'm kind of working up to it and getting to who is it that I want to tell. And then, for instance, in this last film, one of the first places that I wanted to go was to the generation before me. But then COVID happened, and many of them are if they're still here, they're passing. So I felt a time constraint. Then COVID happened. And then in the early days of COVID, no one was trying to talk to anybody they didn't know and love dearly, right? And so that kind of shut that generation down in terms of having live interviews. So then I was with a generation that's my own generation. I had a couple of voices in my head, and I was working with a group of people, a lot of the people that we have in common. So I wanted to get them, but as I was interviewing them, they'd refer me to other people. So I also incorporated that because I didn't want it to be just my group, some group of mine representing East Oakland and Black folks in East Oakland. So it grows like that, and I leave space for that. So that's one piece of it. And of course, I have a reason why I want to why I want to bring someone's voice into it. And I'm very aware of that. So my next step would kind of be, there's a million steps in between, but the next step is kind of, okay, come up with a list of questions that you would ask that person that, first of all, gets them to relax and know that I'm here to lift up their story. And they're not characters. They're not simply characters in me telling my story, right? So my first questions are always to that goal, to let them know that we're in a conversation. There's no right answers. There's no wrong answers. And in fact, that I can ask them a question and they can say, that's not where I want to go, and jump it and go on with whatever they want to tell me. And I'm happy for that. So I start with about 40. Whenever I go to an interview, I have about 40 questions that I've thought through. And I'll ask the first couple, and then I'm listening to see, are the other, 37 questions, are they being answered in the way that people are just talking to me? And the benefit for me is that then the way that they're talking is conversational rather than, I'm not an investigative reporter. So I don't want hard edge answers. I want to be engaged in a conversation with them because I want them to be engaged in a conversation with the audience. So mostly that list of questions, like, so did they talk about, did they talk about their origin story? Did they talk about what the challenges were there, or whatever the issue is that I'm probing? So that's sort of, and then in the end, every now and again, there'll be a lag, because even though I'm like passionate in this moment and I can be passionate, sometimes I'm a little shy and I don't quite, I'm awkward. So if I get into one of those spaces, or they do, then I can fall back on that list of questions, and pump it up again. That's sort of my process. And maybe the most important thing after we've gone through this whole thing, and those interviews usually take an hour and a half or 2 hours, I kind of warn them that they're giving me maybe 2 hours. So if we do an hour and a half, they feel like, oh, I got a half hour back. But the most important question is, do you have anything you want to add? Because then they really get to go as deeply in as they want, or sometimes they say, no, we really covered it all. That's especially that last film. That's how I approached it. The Evolutionary Blues one is a little bit different because, the arc of that, the story belongs to them. So I've done research. I knew, for instance, my arc was that all of this story relates to the fact that we all came from the South. And, when I say all, I don't really mean everyone, but our origin story for the most part starts in the South. And the way that people moved was in a pattern. And so depending on where you are in the country, that pattern makes a different music, because one of the things that people bring with them is their art and culture. The food as well. And you really could kind of tell that story, like from food. Like I love that, what is it, High on the Hog, that really uses food as a center for telling the story of African people all over the globe. It's just such a delightful thing, and he does it so well. He does it with such passion. But in this story, we were going at it from the perspective of music, and also because Oakland has done a tremendous, and my film says that to some degree, but I don't even know if that lifts it up. It's had a tremendous impact on American music culture, and as Isabel Wilkerson says, world music culture, because what we did with American music has been, however, you know what I'm saying, has gone on around the world. And also now I feel like there's a real call and response. So often, in African music, for instance, or almost any place in the world, you'll hear that African American influence that is influenced by African music at its core. And then those cultures will play back into it. And there's this going back and forth that you can hear if you're tuned into that. But so the California, the Oakland in particular story of how we've impacted music has not really been told in a formal way. And as I made the film, one of the things that I really understood, at some point, I'm talking to all these people. So my idea going in is they're musicians. But when I got into it, I said, no, these aren't musicians. These are entertainers. But there's kind of like the musicians and the entertainers. So the musicians, Oakland is a place where, I don't know how many of us know about the Chitlin circuit, but it was an important stop in that circuit. That's one way that there was an infusion of different geographies in music. We were an important stop, and mostly we're known for our bands, and the tremendous number of musicians that are out here. But also what you're seeing a lot of in this film is those entertainers, and you get a because I'd be in the interviews and I'm chuckling because it's, some of our humor is this subtle. And so I'm like kind of laughing, trying not to laugh out loud and interrupt the interview. And I'm thinking, well, these guys just aren't aren't making, they're like comedians. They're like, actors. Anyway. So actually, it was a lot of fun for me.
It must have been, I'm sure. And that's what you just brought up happens often. It's like you have to separate yourself. At least for me, there's some level of, if I'm interviewing, I'm kind of creating fly on the wall. I can't be laughing, can't be messing up the product you're trying to make. So
you can't be laughing, but I also think that I don't separate. So a lot of, I remember Willie Trask, he would say, gosh, she's really easy to talk to because I'm not separating. He really is feeling like we're in the living room, just kind of having a conversation. And, I don't know if you had sent a more of an investigative reporter. I think I was trying to talk to you about that earlier, that the level of them being comfortable and laughing and inside their story is different.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
So I cut around my laughing sometimes.
Okay. Well, are there any other questions? Because we want to keep on time and we want to go to the prompt that we have, where we can have, have people, and we're not going to do breakouts because we don't need to do that, but we want to give people an opportunity to write down some notes about, their ideas for a story and come up with some questions. But if there's, actually, let's do that now. Unless there's any other, dying questions, let's do that. So I'm going to share the screen again briefly. I'll just go ahead and do it to kind of make it easier. Can everybody? Wait a minute. All right. Okay, can everybody see that? Can everybody see that slide there?
The slide's not up. I mean, we see it in the margin.
Yeah, we see speaker notes with the slide on the side. Yep.
All right. So Cheryl, why don't you go through this, and because this is what you came up with, you can present it.
Well, you know, saying kind of what I said about my own process, I thought that maybe you guys could engage in having an idea, and it could be any idea, but also I threw an idea at you if we didn't have time for you to come up with an idea. But based on an idea, I think we dropped off, I think we dropped off one of them, because my first question, depending on what your story is about, is something like, you know, talk about yourself, talk about your family, because that's what loosens folks up a little bit. We're all experts on who we are and where we come from, so that loosens you up. And then for this one that I said was Black urban farmers, right? Kind of getting clear on what the concept of the film is. And then with the outcome in mind, right? Oh yeah. And then, you know, your 2 or 3 lead questions, and then other sample questions that you might talk about. So I see now, I'm sorry, I'm seeing how you wrote that up.
Yeah.
So the examples are talk about your family, like where were you when you first thought about being a farmer? Again, the reason I would frame it like that is that makes somebody go introspective. Sort of like Cheo just did with me, where not only am I thinking, okay, well, I was at Fisk, but no, actually that moment when I took a breath and said, this really is the thing I want to do, right? So, you know, when did you have that first thought about doing whatever it is that we're talking about? And then even more personally, what was that moment of joy or the moment of fear, depending on what your topic is, but what was that moment that kind of blew it out for you? So in this film about being a farmer, you know, what was your thought when the first plant came through the earth? Is that clear? I don't know if that's a little.
Yeah, no, I think the introspective part, and we had talked about this, Cheryl, that basically a lot of times when people are, I've been in, you know, I've taught different kind of storytelling workshops, and a lot of times you'll have people pair up and they're interviewing each other, kind of learning how to be a reporter and that kind of thing. This is not that. This is thinking about the way to get people to be really comfortable with you, the way that people can be very thoughtful and kind of go back into their, excuse me, into some kind of memory banks, right? In a nostalgic way, and then open up. And so let's take 7 minutes or so, maybe come back at 11, what is that, Carrington, maybe 15, no, 11:20, something like that.
Yeah, 11:20.
Come back at about 11:20, and you know, if you have a pen and a pad, or write it in your phone. But some of you have ideas. We talked about it last month for a film or a story that you want to tell. These are ways to get into it. We talked last month about actually coming up with the log line and that first kind of outline and synopsis, but this is different. This is thinking about the questions that you would ask if you already know what your concept is, but what are those questions you would ask your mom or your father or your sibling? And if that's clear, let's take some time, and you can keep your screen open or not, but we'll come back at about 11:20.
Cheo and Sarah, I have a question for y'all as the other participants focus on these prompts and questions.
Okay.
So my mom is part of the program, and she's doing an amazing short series about the shady 80s and the 60s. I'm a filmmaker myself. I've done a few like fellowships programs, I have a question about the difference between a log line and like the spine of a film, because somebody has told me before about the concept of a film having a spine, and kind of like the main concept being the spine of the film. And I'm in pre-production for a few films right now, and I'm wondering about how you shift from that concept and like conceptualizing into creating a solid log line, and kind of like what is expected, especially when you're presenting for funding or just presenting for the pre-production phase in general. Like what's a solid length for a log line, and what's a solid way to turn a concept into a log line?
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Please.
You know, so even this idea that we're talking about, first of all, what is it? What's your film about, right? So you're talking about how do I find that there is language, and then there's you getting it done.
Mm-hmm.
So if the idea of a spine for a film gets your mental juices going, use that language and write out your spine. One of the reasons I'm kind of saying it like that is that how you approach getting money is going to have everything to do about what your film is about, who would be interested in supporting that, and all of that. If you're going for government grants, they're going to or philanthropic grants, they're going to tell you you've got, 200 characters to do this thing or whatever it is. So when I'm beginning a film, a lot of that is not something that I'm worried about. I'm worried about how do I concretize this idea that's been nagging me. And frankly, each proposal, it gets clearer and clearer and clearer until maybe right about the time I'm starting production, it's now crystal clear. So I've even been approaching proposals in that way, because otherwise they're a dog to write, right? But while I'm seeing that what it's doing is driving me deeper into the project I work on, I'm trying to work on, then I kind of welcome that challenge. And it does matter if I get the funding, but if I don't get the funding.
I get what you're saying, like where the priorities lie in pre-production and things. And so the roles that I've been playing since I started making films have generally been like production assistant or production roles, and then also post-production roles. So because that's my experience and that's my passion, is what I focus the most on. And so I'm also wondering about like how often or how much you guys pour, like when you're working on the pre-production part, you're working on the like concept for the film and the sample questions and things. And this is for documentary style, I guess that's what you guys have been focusing on. But I'm thinking about like a whole bunch of different types of films. But when you're doing the pre-production, how much do y'all pour in like post-production kind of thoughts? And you know what I'm saying? Like,
because it's all, look, even that, when I do a timeline, so I try and wait. So when I'm doing, I know there's pre-production, there's production, and there's post-production, but I start out with an idea of the timeline. And in my timeline, a lot of those phases are overlapping, because this is it's a creative process. Like, how would I have known that we were about to have a pandemic? So when the pandemic comes, I'm back in pre-production, figure out now, how do I deal with this right now, right? But all of it is also geared towards the final outcome, because what you're trying to get to is a finished film. It all, and even when you're in the process, frankly, when you're in the process of editing your film, even in the process of doing all the finishing, the audio mixing and all of that, you're jumping back frequently into the pre-production. And one of the beautiful things about a good audio mix is that it can foreground and background things and all. You're back in pre-production, pulling out the most important, the most important elements of what people are saying and all of that. So that also is a fluid and a flexible thing. Now, I don't know if Cheo might be, is it so that you deal, with the kind of more formal, so I don't really live in that world. So my people aren't handing me, checks to be on Netflix or something like that. I mean, and I don't mean to be sarcastic. Somebody's people are. They're just not my people.
I'm the exact same. Like every film I've done so far has been $0 budget. I really relate to your filmmaking style because I consider myself like an organic filmmaker. Like I really don't.
Yeah.
I don't like to do all the details, but I appreciate your wisdom and your responses. And then my last question, when you're really going through all the different phases of production, do you like create one document or do you create like a Google folder? Like,
oh God, you're saying now, where does all that crap go, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I'm doing now? That's the truth. There's so much stuff flying around, and many of my films have a lot of photographs, and so there's these huge photographs, thousands. And with digital photography, I love stills because you had to be very conscientious when you were using film-based cameras. No one can afford to have 10 million, photographs, but now I can have 10 million of the biggest resolution photographs lying around. What I do is buy a new external hard drive for everything. But what you're talking about is one of those things where your phases, they're melding together. Because I use Premiere Pro, right? The big mistake that I make, and sometimes I do it because I'm a neat freak on my computer. So I don't like to have a whole lot of crap lying around and open and all of that. I have one hard drive for each product, and I try and make folders that I can live with. And they usually don't, because when you're working in Premiere Pro, when you move a photograph into a new folder, Premiere Pro goes crazy. Yeah, it goes crazy. Right. But the other thing that I learned the hard way is that anytime you bring media in, you need to name it automatically, because otherwise C001 shows up in 15 different things, and you look up and your film is made up of some crazy stuff.
Right.
So having folders that you can live with, naming your clips so that they don't meld into other clips, all of that kind of stuff. And it is a combination of pre-production and post-production so that you don't end up in the editing process and just being overwhelmed by mess, right?
Right.
Did that answer?
It absolutely did. Thank you so much for sharing these tips, and thank you for creating the stories that you've created. Because for real,
you're my new best friend.
Super important stories you out here creating. Like, no, you just really bridging a gap. What's it called? Accessibility gap. Like some people is historic what you're doing, because some people, man, didn't have access, to technology. Yeah. I'm talking about farmers. I'm talking about people that grew up in the, countryside. And like me, I made my first film in Ghana. So like, it's the same in West Africa. Yeah, it's the same in West Africa. It's like, there was a couple people, Sembene.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like people like that. It's like, dang, you're blazing a trail, because what you're doing is you're providing access to stories in a way that people didn't know.
So, that's one of the reasons that I love this generational thing. I met Ousmane Sembene. I grew up, because I'm that age, right? So one of his,
what was he
black,
like?
Well, the truth is that he's French speaking and I'm not. So we're always, you interface through an interpreter, but his wife was African American. And so, right, look at you. I love you.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And so in fact, he came to Fisk. And, that's one of the joys of being in a historically Black campus, is that you get access to people that you just you could meet, but you might not meet walking down the street. But Sembin's Black Girl, the idea of that is exactly what you're talking about, is putting voice. And in those days, like, Africans didn't have access. They were like us, everybody was scrounging to make these products.
Right.
But his vision was not telling the stories of the presidents and the kings and all of that, but who are the people? Who are my people? Yeah. And so that very much is my style, but it's also what we called in those days, and I still call, kind of first voice. So unlike in my day, you had narrators, you had me interpreting and all of that. I don't do that. Mm-hmm. What I want is to hear what your story is and figure out how to thread that into this idea that's been nagging on me.
Yeah, right? Like interweaving all the interviews. Yes. I do the same, and wow, Black Girl was like the best film ever.
Wasn't
the way they built that one up?
It gives you a worldview that we don't have access to, because no one talks in this country about Africa or the diaspora or. Yeah.
But you know what else? The film, If Beale Street Could Talk, the film version of it reminded James Baldwin's way of writing and telling stories reminds me so much of Sembene. I was just like, dang, they're really good at speaking even from a feminine viewpoint, which is really, like, I didn't even know that could happen. Like, I didn't think it could go down like that, but they did it. And I was like, dang.
One thing, I have Netflix, and when I look at Netflix, and there's all these African films, but again, in my generation, Ousmane Sembène, there was a group of African filmmakers that were really trying to tell stories that are meaningful. But I mean,
revolutionaries.
Well, yeah, they were at least visionaries, right? And many of them were politically motivated, and so they were revolutionary. But I look at they might be funny and they might be well produced, but how many times are you going to tell me that African women are like hitting their men over the, it's what they've done to our image, and there's so much to learn.
Right, that single story, we gotta break that single story. I know, I feel you. Thank you so much, Cheryl.
Thank you.
May I ask one follow-up question? Thank you for that beautiful just weaving, and it's so good to hear about your work too, Carolyn. When you talk about first voice interviewing, what do you call like the philosophy of like co-creating and giving power to your interviewees to be the
center of the story?
Or to be the interviewer of themselves. Like, is that approach to just hand over the mic and even the lens to them? Like, do we call that a particular style? And especially when you're working with global or international interviewees, that you can't necessarily have a film crew there all the time, but you want to tell a longitudinal story. Like, how would you approach that in your experience?
What you're asking me is, for instance, if you're doing a story and there's a piece in Panama and you're not there, you give them the camera and then they roll with it, right? Right. Well, I don't know what the name of that is. I call it perspective, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm looking at a film through their eyes, and they might be delivering that back to me. And now I have to incorporate it into my product. And of course, that is the co-creation, because when I'm the editor, I'm laying my view on top of their view, right? So that's, to me, that's the piece of co-creation. There's a project I'm going to work on I'm still raising money, so I kind of say that and my eyes roll. But children who are homeless, and we've been thinking about, well, do we hand them the kids a iPhone and let them shoot? Because that way we see a world that we don't see when adults get into their space, right? When the adult is there, then we're pulling their attention in a way. So I don't know what the name of that is, but it's a very valid, and it's an amazing way of telling a story, because we're all different in the dark than we are like with everybody with eyes on us. And so I think it's a really effective thing that you can do now. You can do it now because you're not running film through a camera, and you can do it now because on the back end, it just means you might have more editing to do, but you can manage that. You can still put that on your hard drive. You might have to get another hard drive because they might shoot more than you wanted them to shoot, right? But you can manage it, and it's so honest. It's so, and sometimes it also doesn't work, right? Because sometimes their perspective doesn't even fit your storyline. But more often than not, I bet it would. And the other part of that is just being really clear. So like that list of 40 questions that I start off with, I would say, for instance, to somebody, and usually I send those around. So if I'm interviewing 20 people, everybody gets their personalized 40 questions. And then the next thing I say is, I'm sending you this so you can see where my head is, then forget it, right? Because what I'm really trying to get at is your story. But they'll need to know, okay, what realm am I in? So if you're clear with them about where you're trying to go, and then you give them permission to, but you don't have to like check off questions here. Then, you framed it for them, and they can take the freedom and give you what you need.
Can I add that this is a very rich discussion? So I'm so happy that we have these great questions. And, Cheryl, if we don't get to the sample questions, I think people understand the concept. And so sometimes it's like, this is something that we're already kind of past that. One thing I wanted to add, though, is a lot of the experiences I've had is in shooting some docs, across the state in other communities that are bilingual. I've had to bring in translators, and I've also similarly given people cameras where I'm not able to get to them, getting their kind of unfiltered story, right? But finding the right translator and knowing like that person is going to be on the same page. So there's a lot of meetings that happen beforehand. And also, there's pre-production, right? So there's the thinking about the idea for a while, then there's like, going through whatever the outlining processes are, the questions and all those things. But then for me, it's also the pre-interviews. I don't think we really talked about that much, but I do a lot of those. And so before the camera even comes on, there's questions where I will have actually sometimes Zoom interviews with people just to get to know them, right? And that's kind of, for me in documentary filmmaking, it's kind of casting in a way, because casting for me, it's one of the most important pieces. Like, who am I going to follow? Who are these characters? What are their stories? And are they compelling enough over time? If I'm shooting them, if I'm following them for 6 months or for 3 weeks, are there things happening in their lives right now? And so like there's a film I'm working on now where our main subject is a 78-year-old Black woman who is a chaplain at Highland Hospital. And so she's going to doctor's appointments. We had to go to UCSF 2 weeks ago, no, like 4 days ago, because she might have cancer in her eye. And so it's like, that's part of her story. So I got a call. I'm like, okay, I got to grab my camera and let's go. We got to go try to get into the hospital. And but so a lot of it is, and this is for any people working on docs, but any films, it's like, you have to be a one-person band sometimes. You have to just be ready to go. And you have to just, there's so many hats. It's like what Cheryl talked about. There's so many phases, so many things overlap. But if we want to talk about these questions, I mean, there's time, we can talk about them. We can just keep it open to, if people have films they're working on right now and want to get some ideas or some feedback from what you're working on, this is also the time for that.
I want to say one other thing, because you reminded me. One other thing that I do, part of my process, is all of my interviews get transcribed.
Yeah.
So I start with a paper edit.
Yeah.
Now that paper edit, I think Evolutionary Blues, my paper edit, yielded me a 6-hour film, which I understood I was going to have to edit.
Yeah.
But that is, so, and I do a phone call just to be sure that somebody can open up to me. And I think it's the difference in the kind of films that we're making, right? And it's important to know that just these slightly different intentions will make a big difference in how you process. So I don't want anybody telling me what they need to tell me, because I want it to come out of their mouth the first time when I'm grabbing it on film. But I do need to know that my personality, or, because when I get high energy, I'm really high energy. And it's kind of a contrast, because when I'm low energy, I'm really low in energy too. So I avoid too much of that pre-selection, because my selection is already, I want to hear your story, right? So you're kind of in a slightly different position in, and it's some film I make, the next one about the children, that could show up more like what you're talking about. But in the ones that well, maybe and maybe not, because the other thing is that I have a deep commitment to everybody has a story that I want to hear, right? Which means that even when I'm telling a story that I ought to be constructing, almost anybody has a story that I want to hear. I did in this film, East Oakland, I interviewed a guy, and his story didn't fit in that film. And that's the first time that I didn't incorporate an interview, because it just absolutely didn't fit in, but it fits someplace. So I'm holding on to it, and it might show up in some other story, but it would have just been too what do you call it? Everyone else was African-American. He was, he's not, it just wasn't congruent. So there's that. But I do want to say the thing that saves me is the transcripts and doing a paper edit.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a nice cat, by the way. We appreciate your cat.
Oh yeah, she's cute.
She just got in the frame.
Yeah. I wanted to tell Cheryl that I would really love to support you on the film about the kids, if at all possible, just so I can learn from you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm basically gonna start working at this place called Drawbridge, where every week I'm gonna go to a domestic violence shelter that's in between Oakland and Alameda, and then draw with the kids that live there. So they want more guest artists as well. So maybe we can connect on that, build a genuine relationship with the students for a few months, and then see who's interested in filmmaking and go from there.
That's a good idea. I'd love to work with you.
Thank you. I'm gonna reach out to you. I will. And then I'm also working on another film with my big cousin. So my whole family's from the 80s, near E14 in East Oakland. And my uncle is a part of the East Bay Dragons, which is one of the greatest. Yeah. So East Bay Dragons, one of the greatest motorcycle clubs that's a Black male fraternity is deep. And so I've been thinking about doing a series actually on my YouTube channel that's going to be kind of like myths versus facts of East Oakland, because a lot of people have myths and a lot of people hype stuff up. Like, for example, some people might say the East Bay Dragons are a gang. And to me, just because of where I come from and my family structure and my uncle being a part of it, I feel like it's the community security system. and there's a difference. So me and my cousin wanted to film and interview them, but the truth is, like, it's hard to interview dragons because they're OGs. Like, they have a certain code, and I want to be there to support my cousin because he wants to do it, but it's still a boys club. So I kind of have a question about that. Like, how do you feel about, you know, being a woman filmmaker and sometimes asking important questions in an all male space?
Yeah. Well, that is my story with Evolutionary Blues. Boy, those guys, they tried. But you know, so this is the truth, and it's kind of embarrassing. Sometimes I forget I'm from East Oakland, right? I've been like all over the place, and so sometimes I forget. But with those guys and doing Evolutionary Blues, they were rolling me around trying to, you know, they were doing guy things. And I finally said, enough. And you put your foot down, and they stopped that. They stopped that because, you know, yes, you're doing me a favor, but I'm telling your story. So you can fill it up with a whole lot of silliness, or we can get to it. And the silliness is, you know, like they're hitting on me. I'm a 71-year-old woman. I am not confused that they're not really hitting on me, right? You know, all of this stuff. But I'll tell you, when they calm it down, I have 30 big brothers who they are, you know, they show up for me in the most genuine ways, but that's just part of our culture. So the same with the one of the things about, I think, your problem with the motorcycle club is number one, they came to be back in my generation, and often because, you know, guys were coming back from the Vietnam War. So in our space, we didn't know what was going on necessarily. And there was a lot, and the Hells Angels was the prototype. So they were gang-like, but who knows, maybe that was a fraternity for those white guys.
Right. I feel like the biggest gang in this country is the government. We don't have to get into it on Zoom while it's being recorded, but there's a lot of gangs out here. But I think I want to structure that one. Like, I want to start by talking to the oldest OGs, because I didn't know that about Vietnam. I just knew that my uncle, I don't know.
I have an interview that I want to send you. I mean, there's a young white guy who does beautiful podcasts, and he did an interview with the bicycle group, and it did tell that story in the most comprehensive way I've ever heard it said. And it changed I understood then, and I said, damn, like, that was visionary for them to do that. That was truly visionary, because no one was helping those Black kids. They came back from that war, and they were just like on their own.
Right. So, and they had money and like little respect too, which is weird. I know what you're talking about. Thank you. I'm gonna definitely look into all that, because I'm excited. Basically, my intention with this project is I want to heal the divine masculine energy in myself. But also, like, I want to showcase the divine masculine energy in East Oakland and talk about that myth and that fact between toxic masculinity and divine Black masculinity.
Girl, you're cooking. This girl is like, woo! When are we looking at your? Really, you are too much. You're the voice we're looking for. You know why? Because you're talking. You know, you are 2022, 20, 30, 20, 40. And that's the continuation. That's your mom's, that's the Sankofa of it. That's the looking forward, the looking back to go forward. And I will never have your voice. But here's the thing with this film you're talking about with the, for some reason, they're in that film, East Oakland Counter Narratives, and I'm not calling the name.
The Dragons?
Thank you. The thing about them is that you might want to, like, maybe couple with your uncle who knows what the soft spots are there. So when they see him as a youngster, and that's what they'll think of you, even though you've got a family connection, so you've already got an in, but still you're a youngster. When you're partnering with one of their OGs, they'll open up to you. And when they hear you like you're talking right now, they'll open up to you. So you won't have to have that uncle all the way going through it, but you might need to.
Yeah,
And
I
had that.
definitely.
I had one of the musicians who was, you know, opening the doors for me, which helped them all relax. And he sent me over the, you know, barrels over and over again, so that everybody else wouldn't have to, right? So maybe
I
your
feel you.
uncle.
Yeah, definitely. My Uncle Vito's gonna help. Thank you.
You'll be good. Woo. That
was beautiful. And I just want to name that what was shared is actually resonates so much with me for a lot of reasons. One side note, Drawbridge was one of my first internships that I ever did, and it really drove me on a path to build my own creative healing process. So I hope that goes really wonderfully for you. Also, I think this kind of piece around really holding the culture of the folks that you're interviewing at the center, right? And the project that I'm working on will require me to sort of work with folks who have a really professional reputation to uphold, and you know, certain codes of professionality that come with being a medical practitioner, that come with being a leader in their community, in hospitals or health clinics. And so this piece and conversation about how and who can approach them, this process of allowing them to relax and show up to sort of get past the reputational thing that they have to hold up, I think is really interesting. And I know, Cheo, I would love to talk with you. I'm sure you working amongst you know, healthcare practitioners in particular, especially in this time when the narratives around the role of healthcare practitioners are much more centered than I think they ever have before. I don't know, I think it's just a really unique group to work with. And so all of these conversations about, you know, walking with folks a long time beforehand, or as much as you can before, so that when it comes down to that actual production time, there's that sense of connection, and that can allow their truth and their story to come out. I think is something I'm going to spend a lot more time diving into and building into my timeline.
Even in professionalism. So you can be, you know, when you're watching all of it, we're really exposed to the medical industry because of this COVID, kind of the medical industry around the world. But when you're hearing from that industry, even though they have a code, if they're not telling me something that has this resonance of authenticity, of humanism, of emotional, I hear so much stuff that it's kind of going like this. So even within the rubric of holding their professionalism so that they're not, and also you're an editor. So if someone says something that's out of character, you've got the opportunity not to use that part, right? But I think that you still want the message that it is that kind of universal humanism, that when we're watching that, we can resonate with it as someone telling us the truth, rather than this industry kind of feeding us more crap, right?
Yeah, this is very rich. I'm really happy that this conversation, you know, it's always great to have quantity and many people, but I think we don't always have the opportunity to have these kind of intimate conversations with the director, with all these, you know, so that's the benefit of what this is. This group will continue to grow. I was at an event last night. I'm going to share this really briefly, but we were talking about different communities. It was a film event that I was at with other filmmakers, and we were talking about the Bay Area film community versus LA versus New York. And there's specifically a rich history of documentary film making in the Bay Area, you know, since 70s, really 80, you know, 70s, 80s, organizations like BayVac and other groups. And there was basically agreement that, you know, the mindset in the Bay has always been, it's more so about a healthy place to live. It's about healing. It's about kind of transformation. You can call it hippies or, you know, the kind of the 60s counterculture, but it had that kind of frame versus LA, which was more of, you know, Hollywood, right? But people were saying that, and it relates to this conversation, people were saying that, you know, as filmmakers, it's not about just obviously having the technical ability to make or produce a film, you know, or know the right executive producer and distributors, and like kind of even to the extent what we were talking about, log lines and what to do in post-production, like all of that is very technical and important, but who you show up as an artist in the beginning, who you show up as, you know, as somebody who's committed to telling a story that might change lives, that might transform communities, that's going to be, to me, the measure of your ability, you know, as a filmmaker, and as you know, to engage audiences later. So I think that's important, and that's what, you know, what we're talking about. And I know, CJ, you talked about telling your family story when we first had the screenings, and so I'm looking forward to seeing your log line, the outline, the synopsis, like, you know, because those are just the first steps. And once you got that down, you know, and you can look at the last recording for last month, because we went over log line, one sentence.
Okay, so I was like, I don't know what that is.
Got to be one sentence, generally speaking. And there's log lines for narrative and documentaries, either one, right? But more famously kind of known more in narrative. But basically it's the way to describe your film, kind of an elevator pitch, one sentence. And then from there you go to a synopsis. I mean, you know, and then from the synopsis, an outline, a treatment. Everybody has a different approach. It could be, Cheryls could be totally different. The point is,
she gonna do all that.
Whoever does it. The point is start capturing those family stories. That's why this question prompt we have up here is important. Start recording those questions and asking those questions, because elders forget, or they get old, or they move on to the next place that they move on to. And we want to get those as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to figure it. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Well, one of the things, so I'm listening to Cheo, and one of the things is that is a format. Another format is, I don't know where you're going to get the money to do this, but say, for instance, maybe it's California Arts Council, maybe it's California Humanities. Download their application and start filling it out, because it prompts you, it gives you how many words you can use and all of that. And you'll be doing that over and over and over again. And it might be, I don't know, you know, when I get a new magazine, I go to the back and work to the front. My brain is strange, right? So it might be that your approach is either, I think that Cheo's approach is going from the front to the back. Mine is going from the back to the front. That's just the way the brain is working. And so I can find that log line in the context of some synopsis I had to give, where it might be a challenge for me to find the two sentences that describe the whole thing, right? So there's many ways to do it. And you're the person with the story, and she's the person with the filmic storytelling skills. So don't, you know, CJ, do your part. Do your part.
And
you know,
sorry,
Cheryl, I'm joking.
But that's the other thing. Like, there are different lanes, and then the higher you get up, kind of in the distribution, or like how much money is going into this film, then those lanes become very clear, right? So I'm working on a film now that's $1 million budget film. So we have executive producer, we have line producers, we have a producer, we have, you know, co-directors, and then a producer, generally speaking, could be, from what I see, is going to be CJ, right? It's the business manager of the film, generally a producer. So it's that person who is raising money, that person who is organizing the shoots, who is doing, and so the director, you know, a writer-director is that, maybe it's your daughter, that's the person who's thinking about the interviews and the creative process or whatever, but you need both. Often with indie short films, like I've done, like Cheryl's probably done, we're everything. We're like wearing all those hats. Today I'm a director. Tomorrow I shot yesterday, and then I'm gonna go try to edit. It's not easy, but it's important to know how to be in all those different lanes. But what's really important is to have a good producer, the business manager,
That's the glue.
business manager of your film.
The producer is the glue. I feel like sometimes, and I'm super down to help my mom. That's why pretty much why I'm here is, to support my mom on her journey, and we gonna get it done,
Get it
I
done.
actually have 2 film ideas. One is about like the matrilineal line in my family, which is the history, including like my great niece Callie and Chase
That's my
and
goddaughter.
Kanara, and going all the way back up. We did our African ancestry and somewhere Igbo person.
The first woman in our matrilineal line
And that
is
would be
Igbo.
interesting to kind of trace that history. So what you were talking about, Cheo. And then the other one, I was like the tetherball queen at Highland Elementary School.
Okay.
And there's so many lessons that I learned from playing tetherball that I still use today. Like you just gotta pound it so hard that it can't even come for you. And by the time you wrapped it around the pole, you're like, next. And I was that way in 6th grade and 5th and 4th grade. And I just think about the playground.
Great metaphor.
Friends. Huh?
It's a great metaphor.
I think about the playground and even all my friends, the ones who sometimes I still see walking down East 14th Street and they're not doing well. And I remember them and trying to understand, there was no difference between us on the playground. And what happened? I was the one that was absolutely expected to go to jail, honestly, at that age. I was a piece of work and I didn't. And there were people who were like the smartest girl in the class. Like she was brilliant. And I see her now sometimes and she doesn't recognize me or anything like that. And I just remember the playground. And I do remember like, what does the playground and all the different games we played, double dutch, hopscotch, all of those games, and how did we all felt really free then. We all felt unlimited possibilities. No one ever envisioned anything that we're doing right now. And what would the current CJ say to, and CJ wasn't even a thing, it was curling. And so what would all of these women and people and men say to the person that was on the playground, and what would those games? I don't know how to really figure that out.
I'm just gonna cry already.
You're gonna cry.
But she can. But see, CJ, she can. So I mean, and she says she's about to cry. If she internalizes that, because it's a challenge. It's a beautiful metaphor, but it's a challenge, and it's also you're going back in time. You're living in 2 time spaces at the same time. It's a beautiful metaphor. And when you talk about, Sweet Honey and the Rock used to have this game. I bought it for every kid in my life. It was a book that played all those childhood games, and there's songs that went with it and all of that. But anyway, just a really amazing metaphor. And so how to do it, that's the film part of it. You've got the story idea and you might flush it out a little bit, but how to get that on a piece of film so that when I see it as your audience, I know exactly where you're going with it, right? Or if I don't know where you're going with it, I can feel where you're going with it. And
that
either way,
that might be one of those films where you start it at the end and then you rewind time to the beginning. And I was thinking about interweaving like black and white film with color film and fading into color and just making it a short film, but a heavy hitting one with like 5 actors. And since Callie has your middle name, Callie could be you playing tetherball as an actress. There's little things like that, but.
And one of the questions I had, we talk about like Cheo working on more of a major film. And do people think of these really short films as kind of like a clip that you'd show to somebody and maybe they pick it up and make a bigger film around it? Or is it?
You can never tell. I used a film in in the Evolutionary Blues. Marlon Riggs, who's probably one of the best known Bay Area filmmakers, in the 80s did this film of 7th Street and all the musicians. He did the interviews with them so that when I did a film, I got to show these people talking for themselves only because he had done this 30-minute short. So, but there's also a world of shorts that lives on its own. And so You know, it can be Julie Dash's film. I don't know if you know Julie Dash.
Yeah.
Julie Dash worked on this one film from her first day in film school. Maybe that's how she got in film school. I think it is. And then she eventually, maybe 10 or 15 years later, made a feature film out of it that I think is going to kind of be one of the most classic African-American women films ever made. I really do. And I don't think we still embrace what she's done with that, Daughters of the Dust. But so all of that to say, just make it. But you know, one of the things you were talking about, you could have the older CJ and these other women interviewed, and then like your daughter said, actors being, and you can be interplaying kind of like that. It might not be that hard. You just have to kind of go through the steps of thinking it through and coming up with, but I think it's a great metaphor.
CJ, I would also say use your business sense and acumen and all the savvy you have in the connections, and think about where you want the film to go, what audience, what level. So is the film a multi-million-dollar budgeted film? Like ultimately, is it a feature film? If that's it, then from my current like trajectory, and then I'm an indie filmmaker, so I make short. I know how to make the short film, and I would suggest you make a short of that, right? But it could also be, if again you're trying to go to make this into a feature or a series or whatever, and work to use the connections you have to get it on those platforms, then you need a pitch deck, and a pitch deck doesn't always have to have a sizzle reel, but generally it does. And so a sizzle reel is like a 2-minute, some cases 90 seconds. Doesn't have to be long. And it just is a concept to show what you're doing. And there's people out there who will tell you different things. There's people I know who will say, go get the red camera, hire this big crew, spend, $40,000 on a sizzle reel, which absolutely you don't need to do. Because it's all about who you're pitching it to, what audience you're talking. If they're Black investors who get it and understand it, they just might need to see your story with slides and pictures, your passion, and some of the audio cap, like however you want to put it together is my point. But you have to figure out where you want it to go. If it's going to go on an indie kind of, shorter kind of thing, maybe you make a 2 or 3 minute, maybe your daughter creates a 2 or 3 minute sizzle reel that gives people the whole story, but it's a short, and they say, oh, I would like to see it as a series. I'd like to see it as a feature. And you put that on YouTube or you put it someplace. But there's 101 different ways to go, but you don't have to spend a lot of money to make it, because it could be it'll be a waste of money, is my point.
Yeah, because Pixar's right in our backyard anyway. So it's like, honestly, I feel like Pixar owes Black people money in the form of reparations.
Just Pixar or who or
no, everybody.
Okay, all right, just checking.
Hollywood owes all of us money in this Zoom call, not, you know what I'm saying? But I agree with you, Cheryl. And I also wanted to say that Daughters of the Dust is one of the greatest, if not the greatest film of all time, because they depicted Black women doing magic in a way that wasn't evil or devilish. So cool.
Yeah.
And they depicted family in a way that wasn't fake, and it wasn't real either. It was a great story. Great actors.
They also did what you kind of were describing. She did, because this really is Julie's film. So she did a way of unpacking myths.
Yes.
So that I thought was phenomenal. So yeah.
It was so iconic.
It's amazing. Oh.
Yeah.
So with this series that we're doing, Cheryl, and if people were to get their film together, or short film together by the summer or whatever, how many minutes are you thinking it should be? Is it like,
You're talking about your film?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to like get our act together and be able to present.
So if it's a short film, like a short standalone that you want to do, then it could be. It just depends on kind of like, to me, it depends on the the scope that you're trying to capture in this story. It could just be a scene. It could just be a very strong scene. If it's something you're trying to pitch to raise money. If you're trying to make a full kind of short story film, it could be anywhere from, I've seen those films in 3 minutes. It could be a 3-minute narrative short. It could be told in 3 minutes, or it can be 7 or 10 or longer. But one thing to understand is every minute is going to cost more money. If you're talking about actors and narrative and scripting, this kind of, if you're talking about just sitting down, interviewing relatives and doing it as a documentary, then that's different. But I'm happy to work, happy to help you if you need some support with it, questions answered, because it's to me one of those, not even unforgotten or forgotten, unforgotten, unknown. It's both. Not the tetherball one, but the one about where you grew up, when you talked about with the fire and all of that, the bombing.
Oh yeah. From Tulsa to West Oakland.
Yeah.
To Russell City. Yeah.
Yeah, Russell City.
Yeah.
So, but I think, as this evolves, like we have a director coming on who's a good friend of mine, Adisa. He's coming on next month. Let me actually share the screen and show his. So this is the film that this is his first feature film. Came out, I think, 2 years ago, and it's on Amazon and several other platforms. Skin in the Game is a story about, he was going to do it as a documentary, but he made it into a feature. It's a feature film about human trafficking. It's set in West Oakland. I'm not West Oakland. It's set in, he shot it in LA, but I believe it's set in Oakland. And it talks about what if you drive down International Boulevard or East 14th, you will see, unfortunately, a lot of young Black girls on the block. And so he asked some questions, took a long time to, interview people who were really, he approached it like a documentary. So he did a lot of research, and then he he directed it and got all the people I just mentioned in terms of the producer and other people, and got it out on the festival circuit. And, you can watch it now, tonight, or whenever you want to watch it. It is on Amazon, but he'll be on next month talking about that process. And we're at time, so we can go a little over if we need to, but I want to thank everybody for having patience with us, with me specifically, trying to get these Zoom links right. Apologize that couple people did text me, couple people couldn't get in. I think that we're going to get our Facebook game up now that I have Carrington helping. Hooray, thank you, Carrington, for coming on board. And so we're going to get the links out for the next meeting for March 26th really soon, probably next week. You'll get some updates on those. And I think we'll just keep it informal to the extent that we've had just open conversations, because I want this to be not only about showing clips and showing films, but having some really practical answers or approaches for people who want to have, who want to get into filmmaking and take it very seriously, because we're at a place now where I know the industry has changed, so it's gotten democratized in a way because of technology. A lot of everyone really is coming into it, but as Cheryl said, distribution, access, and money is still, those barriers are still stopping, are still challenging for people to get into it. The film I want to recommend everybody see tonight, if you have some time, on Netflix. I watched it last night. It's called Residue. So Residue is a film about a brother who returns to DC. He went to Howard University, he leaves and goes away, and then he comes back home and he has to deal with white gentrification in his neighborhood. And it's a really quiet film. It's a really under the radar. Somebody else told me about it. I hadn't heard of it. Ava DuVernay picked it up and put it on her network, Array. And Ava DuVernay distributes these kind of films in ways that other people are not distributing films. Like this film, I don't even know if it was at film festivals that much. It's just like she saw it and she was like, let's get this film on Netflix. So I watched it last night. It's pretty good.
It's on Netflix, you said?
It's on Netflix. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
Residue.
Love Netflix. I will look it up.
Yeah.
Thank y'all. We gotta go. I gotta
Okay.
get back to work, but
All right.
not that this isn't
Well,
work,
thank
but
you for
nice to meet
showing up.
everybody.
Yeah.
Nice
Yes.
to meet you all. Thank you so much for this rich discussion. I feel so fed and grateful for all the stories shared and to witness your visionary duo, CJ and your family. I just, hats off to all that everyone here is working on. I'm really grateful to share space this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy.
Thanks,
Thank you, Cheryl.
everyone.
We love you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you,
Karen.
CJ. Bye, Carolyn.
Thanks for joining.
Okay. See you soon.
Well, that went well.
That went well. But I know what I need to work on. We got to get these links fixed. In this case, I think it was just because I was on at the same time, but then there were some other people who were going to an older link. So we can start, I'm gonna need your help to kind of streamline the marketing of these. Maybe you can dig into the game changers piece, because when you clicked on, you said it took you, it worked, right?
Mm-hmm. At least from the Facebook page itself. I'm not sure if people are clicking on what you sent through the constant contact, and that's not updated or something. But that's what
I think I know. Yeah, I know. I think I know what happened. It was, I don't know if you got it. I think you might have. If you look in your email, I think I had sent two. Yeah, I had sent two different ones through Constant Contact. When I was kind of giving you the tour of Constant Contact, and I think I was showing you, and I clicked send. Then I later went in my email, and I seen that one went out, and it went out with like this month's event, but because I hadn't edited the actual body copy inside there, it had last month's link. So I think that's part of it. That's part of, like, that happens. So I know that's part of the problem. So that part hopefully won't. The bigger part, I think, is just trying to increase attendance. So I know that you'll probably, hopefully some of the people that you sent emails to will respond. And we will do some social media as well. So we've got a whole month to work on that. So
yes, we do.
yeah.
Good.
All right. So I think, did we say our regular meetings days? Did we put that? We agree on that? I don't remember.
We did not. I'm still awaiting your Game Changers calendar, which might.
Okay. So I'll send you, but I don't remember. Did we say Thursday?
Oh, we said Wednesday. We said Wednesday.
Really? I thought it was Thursday. Wednesday?
Either. That's what I remember, but
All
I
right.
may be wrong. I know that it was between 2 to, I think we said 2 or 3:40 to 5 my time, which is 1:40 to 5, 1:40 to 3.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'll await your confirmation on that.
But are those, which, between those 2 days, which one's better for you? Because I think
honestly, either works. Thursday still works. Tuesdays and Thursdays are the days that I have class, but that time frame in between, if it's like an hour meeting, can totally work.
I'm gonna make it, so I'm looking at all my other meetings and stuff. I think Wednesday might be good. So I think Wednesdays at 11.
All right.
And so I'll send you an invite for Wednesday, March 2nd at 11. And then between then and now, or on that, we'll probably have like, or maybe before, an agenda of just kind of things to, the social media stuff, start working on that.
Okay, 11 your time, which is
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock my time.
It can
Okay.
be earlier if it needs to be.
This particular Wednesday, I have graduation yearbook photo, or yearbook photo.
No, we don't want to conflict with that.
Sorry.
You're taking pictures for that, or what? What are you doing?
Yeah, just taking some quick pictures. I don't imagine that it to interfere too bad. I will have a full face of makeup and all of that on. But besides that, let me see. I mean, Thursday still works. I won't be doing any crazy stuff Thursday.
We can do Thursday, but it would probably need to be later. So if you can do like 1 o'clock our time, 4 o'clock.
1 o'clock your time, 4 o'clock my time.
Or actually 9:30 my time, which would be before, or 10 a.m., like 9:30 Thursday, which would be 12:30 for you Thursday.
Actually, yeah, oh no, that doesn't work. I have a class that starts at 12:40.
And later after 4, are you busy after that?
I have a class that starts at 3:40. So between 2 p.m. and 3:40 my time is the best time, which is
what days? I thought you said there are a couple days where you're not in class as much. Are those Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday?
Yes, those are Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Tuesday and Thursdays are usually the most busy, but of course I have the Wednesday yearbook thing. But
all right. So then why don't we have our meeting on the 4th? Because that will allow me I'm juggling a lot of stuff in the beginning of the week, and that'll allow me to start lining up some tasks for you and those kind of things. So why don't we meet Friday the 4th, 10 a.m. my time, which would be 1 o'clock for you.
Perfect.
All right, I'm gonna set that up. And then I don't know if I want to meet on Fridays in general. Maybe we'll go back to Monday, but I want to start off the March with little time. So after Friday, we'll probably do Mondays or Wednesdays.
Okay, that absolutely works.
Okay, I'm gonna send you an invite. Go out and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You enjoy the rest of yours too. We'll be working.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I got a couple more Zooms, but after 4 o'clock, I'll be able to take it easy, take a break.
All right, you hang in there, Cheryl.
All right. Wait, I was gonna
me.
ask you, what is the weather like out there? We've been getting the cold thing going on here. It's been.
We had actually these last few days, maybe before yesterday, it was like 3 solid days of like weather in the 60s, but now we're back to the 20s and 30s. So is that what you're getting out there in Oakland?
Not 20s, no, we don't. But for Oakland, it's 40s, 45, which is cold for here for us.
Oh yeah, you don't want to hear what's going on in Chicago right now. You don't want to know.
That's who I was talking to. You a veteran when it comes to that, so.
Oh yeah. I came here and I was like, do I even still need my big coat? You know, I didn't really need it as much, but yeah, we're hanging in there.
Okay.
All right, Cheo. Have a great weekend.
You
Talk
too.
to you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.